the wires beneath our skin. They say every revolution begins with a whisper, but in Umuoma, it began with a voice that felt like truth brushing against your soul. The Harmattan wind had just started to lose its bite, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the red earth market square. Women in bright wrappers arranged their vegetables with rhythmic precision, goats bleated in lazy disagreement, and the smell of akara frying in blackened pans drifted through the air like a familiar memory. And into that ordinary morning walked Kachi, tall, lean, with the quiet intensity of someone who had fought more battles inside his mind than outside. He wore a simple brown shirt and trousers faded by village sun. But there was something else, a silence around him that felt purposeful, as if his thoughts moved with the weight of thunderclouds. He stepped onto the broken cement block people used as a makeshift platform and cleared his throat. Nobody noticed at first. Then he began to speak, and the market stilled. "My people," Kachi said, his voice deep, steady, carrying the kind of conviction that could turn a skeptic into a believer. "One of the biggest lies you were ever told, or that you told yourself, is that you have a mind of your own." A woman selling plantain paused mid-peel. A boy chasing his brother skidded to a halt. Even the akara oil seemed to stop sizzling. Kachi continued, "You think your thoughts belong to you. You think your emotions rise from inside you. But my people, you are not as independent as you believe. Someone wired you. And the question is, who?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. An elder, chewing bitter cola, narrowed his eyes. "Who is this boy?" A young woman whispered. "He speaks like the prophets in old stories." Kachi kept going. "Crowd engineering," he said slowly, letting the words land. "The simple science of making many people think and feel exactly what a few want them to think and feel. Your happiness, your anger, who you love, who you hate, all of it can be programmed." People leaned closer, drawn by something they couldn't name. Kachi lifted his chin. "Have you ever met someone whose voice felt like it came from God? Someone who gave you hope, challenged your mind, made you see yourself clearly?" Heads nodded instinctively, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, you began to resent that person, distrust them, hate them. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Kachi's voice softened. "You think you changed your mind by yourself? But no, someone engineered you." An elderly man muttered, "Tufiakwa." This boy sees too much. Children who understood nothing still felt the tension. Kachi didn't stop. The minority with information will always control the majority without it. It has always been so. The lie is that you are in control. Silence swallowed the square, the kind of silence that precedes either transformation or backlash. When Kachi finally stepped down, the market buzzed differently. Something had been awakened. Something that frightened even those who didn't understand it. And standing at the edge of the crowd, hidden behind a row of yam sellers, was Chief Obadike, the most politically powerful man in Umuoma. He watched Kachi with the sharp interest of a man who understood threats the moment they were born. "This one," the chief muttered, "is a problem, a very dangerous problem. Because a man who teaches a crowd to think is deadlier than a man who teaches them to fight." The next morning, Umuoma was buzzing like a disturbed anthill. Children repeated Kachi's words in the streets like riddles. Women discussed him as they pounded yam. Men debated him in the palm wine joint. Who is he? Where did he learn to speak like that? Is he a prophet or trouble? But the most important discussions were happening in places the ordinary ear could not reach. Inside the cool, dim meeting hall behind the chief's compound, 4 men and 1 woman sat around a low wooden table. They were the elite, the ones who influenced the town without ever raising their voices. Chief Obadike stood at the center. His voice was low, deliberate. "That young man is not ordinary. The people are listening to him too quickly, too deeply." Councilman Madu frowned, but he only spoke once. "That is enough," Obadike snapped. "A single spark can burn a forest." The only woman in the room, Madame Bisi, tapped her long nails slowly. "What exactly is he saying that scares you so much?" Obadike looked at her sharply. "He is telling the people they are controlled, that their thinking is manipulated, that their emotions can be programmed. If they believe him, how do we govern them? How do we influence them? How do we lead them?" Lady Bisi smiled faintly. "You're worried about leadership." "No," Obadike whispered, stepping closer. "I am worried about losing control." A quiet fell over the room. Then the chief said the words that marked the beginning of Umuoma's darkest season. "We must turn the people against him, quietly, subtly, predictably." Councilman Madu swallowed. "You mean crowd engineering?" Obadike smiled. "The same thing he accused us of. Of course. We will show him how it really works." He walked to the window, watching the town below. "Here is the plan," he said calmly. "We do not attack him directly. We attack the emotion people feel when they hear his voice." Everyone leaned forward. Obadike continued. "First, plant doubt, then suspicion, then irritation, then fear. How? Whispered the youngest councilman. The chief turned and looked at them the way a hawk looks at smaller birds. The same way we always do, he said quietly. Whispers. And the whispers began. At the tailor's shop, someone casually mentioned, "He talks too boldly. I hear men like that always have hidden motives." At the market, a trader whispered, "I heard he insulted the elders in another town." Near the stream, two women gossiped. "They say his voice is too charming. Maybe he uses charms." In the palm wine bar, a drunk man slurred, "Those who speak big English always end up becoming dictators." No one knew where the rumors came from, but everyone repeated them. That is how crowd engineering works, small whispers, repeated by many mouths, creating one giant truth. Meanwhile, Kachi continued his talks, honest, passionate, unpolished. But now something was different. When he stepped on the platform, the smiles were fewer. When he spoke about liberation, some people frowned. When he ended his talk, the applause was thinner. He felt it, that shift, that invisible hand pulling the crowd away from him. One evening, as he sat near the stream washing his hands, Amara, his childhood friend, approached quietly. "You felt it today, didn't you?" He didn't look up. "Yes. They're turning people against you." "I know. Are you not afraid?" Kachi finally raised his eyes. "I am not afraid of them turning the crowd," he said. "I'm afraid of what the crowd becomes, when it stops thinking for itself." Amara sat beside him, voice trembling. "Kachi, they will come for you." He smiled sadly. "They already have." Above them, fireflies flickered across the darkening sky, tiny lights struggling to remain bright against the night. It happened gradually. Then, suddenly, a slow poison spreading through the minds of a people who didn't even know they had been injected. One morning, Kachi returned to the market square to speak, the same place where he had ignited hearts just days before. But this time, the energy was off. Children didn't come running, women didn't pause their work, men didn't gather their stools. Instead, they watched him with wary eyes, the kind reserved for strangers, or people carrying rumors like disease. Kachi felt something heavy settle in his chest, but he still stepped forward. He lifted his voice. "My people." But before he could continue, a man shouted, "We don't need your big speeches. Let us rest." Another voice chimed in. "Every day you talk. Are you the only one who knows anything?" A woman hissed, "God forbid, bad thing. May you not bring disaster on us." Laughter scattered through the crowd. Not joyful laughter. Mocking laughter. Kachi tried again, voice trembling despite his effort. "I only want us to understand," a teenage boy interrupted. "Understand what? That we are all stupid, that we cannot think for ourselves. That's not. You want to make us fight our leaders. You want to turn us against one another. You think you are wiser than the elders." Voices piled on top of each other, fueled by a heat that had not existed before. Kachi froze. These were the same people who once nodded at his words, who once said his voice brought light, who once whispered that God had touched his tongue. And now, they looked at him like a threat, a problem, a disease. Someone threw a small stone. It hit his shoulder. A ripple went through the crowd. Another stone flew, then another. They weren't trying to kill him, not yet. Crowd engineering rarely begins with deadly force. It begins with humiliation. Amara ran forward, shielding him with her body. "Stop this! Are you people mad? What has he done to you?" Someone shouted, "He has bewitched your mind. He is using you." Kachi whispered, "Amara, leave them." "No," she cried. "They don't even know why they're angry. Can't you all see something is wrong?" But they couldn't. That was the point. Crowd engineering blinds before it destroys. Kachi finally stepped down, quietly, slowly, as if the ground beneath him belonged to someone else. And the crowd felt victorious, though none of them could explain why. As he walked away, people whispered behind him, "I told you he was dangerous. See how he wants to confuse us. Imagine coming to teach us how to think. Good thing we stopped him before he destroyed the town." Amara put her arm around him, her voice breaking. "Kachi, what will you do now?" He stared at the setting sun, its orange light bleeding across the sky like a wound. His voice was low. "Now, I find out who is pulling the wires beneath this town." He turned away from the square, heart heavy but eyes burning with resolve. Because he finally understood. The people were not his enemies. The crowd was just a weapon. The real enemy was the hand that held it. The council's oven. The thing about power is that it rarely announces itself. It simmers until the room smells like smoke, and then someone who has always been comfortable with heat decides to add wood. Kachi did not understand the machinery at first. He felt its effects, the shifted faces, the thrown stones, the friend who no longer looked him in the eye. But the machine itself was hidden behind polite hands and quiet rooms. It wasn't until a young mason whispered that he had seen Chief Obadiah speaking with 3 traders the night before that the pattern began to line up like a map. "What did they say?" Kachi asked the mason in a voice so low the words felt like seeds. The mason rubbed his thumb across a scar. They spoke of order, of safety. They said we are at risk of being led astray by one voice. They asked the traders to tell the story in their own way. The sort of story that people already sort of know, if they let themselves. You know, things that make a good gossip. Kachi understood then that the rumor was not an accident, it was a plan. He waited until evening and walked the town's quieter places. The backyard where the barbers cut hair and made jokes about town politics. The small mosque courtyard where men folded their hands. The open verandas where women shelled beans and exchanged news in soft parcels. He asked questions like a man trying to learn what kind of thread a neighbor used to mend a torn cloth. Some answers were simple. A woman who sold akara told him they paid the boy who sings in the market to change his line about wise old men to a verse about how young talk causes problems. A trader said a half bottle of liquor and a few coins had loosened a friend's tongue. A schoolteacher admitted to being handed a list of phrases that should be emphasized in lessons. Phrases about the dangers of new ideas and the virtue of obedience. Obidiki, Kachi asked the schoolteacher. The man nodded, eyes dropping like leaves. He makes it subtle. He knows people resist the obvious. But with 100 small things, a line here, a slant there, the people will feel the wind has always blown that way. When he went to the palace to confront the chief, he found the place composed and warmed by a hearth that never burned too bright. Obidiki received him with the precise courtesy of someone who had practiced patience and had enough wealth to be bored by sudden storms. Kachi, the chief said, folding his hands, you have always spoken loudly. You must admit you have unsettled many minds. I asked you a simple thing, Kachi said. Why are you turning the town? Who benefits when they cannot see their own minds? It was a bold question. The chief's mouth made a line that looked like a prayer bead being counted. We benefit from peace, he said blandly. When people fight, crops rot, and the poor starve. Stability is a virtue. Kachi's shoulders twitched with contempt. You call your fear of losing power stability. If we do not learn to question our feelings, we will be moved like wind-blown leaves. Is that the peace you want? Obidiki did not answer directly. He did something worse. He smiled with the kind of smile that meant he had long ago learned how to hide the blade behind a hand. We will not debate this now, he said smoothly. The town needs rest. Go home, Kachi, and rest your sharp tongue. Kachi left the palace with no sense that arguments would work. He realized the fight was not simply one of facts. It was a battle for the town's very capacity to know itself. That night, as he sat with Amara on the low stool outside the house where they had grown up, he thought of the web of small lies and trades, and of how his first honesty, his declaration that people were being wired, had triggered that web. People fear the work of thinking, Amara said softly, breaking the quiet. It is easier to follow a tune than to learn an instrument. Kachi nodded. So we give them an instrument. How? She asked. You saw how quickly they turned. Slowly, he said. We teach 3 questions. We teach them to suspect not their neighbors, but their feed. We make them able to ask, like cooks tasting soup, who put the spice? Who benefits? They began with small things. Kachi and Amara found 7 people who moved between different parts of the town. A grain seller, the barber, a nurse at the small clinic, a teacher, a palm wine tapper, a storyteller at children's evenings, and the mason who had first told him about the chief's meetings. These people had the soft power of everyday trust. If they could learn to ask and to model asking, curiosity might become contagious in a healthier direction. They called themselves the gatherers, not because they gathered crowds for Kachi, but because they gathered questions. Their meetings were quiet, tactical, full of the practicalities of human persuasion. They made lists of ordinary questions, phrased like market calls. Who gains if everyone is afraid? What changed since this morning? Who told you that? They practiced asking without scolding, because shame and accusation only push people deeper into the arms of the ones who sell them surety. Amazingly, it worked in small places. The barber, who had once trimmed the chief's son's hair, started to cut hair and ask customers, whose story told you this thought? It felt like a rude question at first, but with time, it tweaked consciousness. The schoolteacher put one of the questions into classes as a critical exercise. Children, unburdened by the heavy habits of deference, asked the same blunt questions at home. Even so, the council widened its tactics. Obidiki read the slow attack and decided that suspicion and gossip were insufficient. They needed a story people would remember and repeat, the kind that replaced the person's humanity with a caricature. One dawn, a rumor spread that Kachi had accepted money from a trader in a neighboring village to speak against the chief. The trader in question had in fact given Kachi a small gift weeks before for paper to print a pamphlet. No one had been paid. The story, however, was dressed in all the tones people loved. Betrayal, greed, inside deals. It moved fast, because the machine that created it had long-standing hands in the tavern, in the marketplace, and even in the small council behind the queen's compound. Kachi read the words that people had stitched together into accusation as if they were arrows. He could have shouted the truth, produced the scrap of paper, showing the gift was for paper and not for subterfuge, but he knew that the council had anticipated such a defense. They would call the paper a forgery, or they would plant a rumor that the paper was proof of bigger schemes. So he chose another tactic that surprised even those closest to him. He staged a small, visible confession. At market time, he mounted his old platform with a humble look and said, "Yes, I once accepted a favor. I was a boy naive enough to trust a promise. I asked for paper to write truth on, and I was burned by trusting the wrong man. I will not be ashamed of the mistake, because it taught me how easily even good desires can be bent by the wrong hands." There was a small, stunned silence. Then a few voices, familiar with him, shouted, "We forgive you." And there were other voices, some that had been primed for accusation, that continued to murmur. Kachi had given them two things, a reality they could accept, and a moral demonstration of humility. The quick, loud claim lost some edge because he had not tried to hide. The gatherers watched and learned. Truth told plainly is hard to twist into a monstrous shape. But Obadiah did not stop. His oven of plans continued to bake longer schemes. He reached deeper, using the kind of leverage that had kept him powerful for years. Debts, favors owed, and sometimes the promise of care for the town. He arranged a festival and placed in it a satirical play that painted dangerous talkers as men who destroyed houses. The play was subtle, not an outright attack, but an image placed in the audience's mind between laughter and music. Kachi understood something as he watched the play unfold on the day of New Yams. Power does not always need to break you to control you. It cultivates the sense that safety means staying silent. The harder thing was not to topple a leader, but to make a people find their own voice again. He had to be patient. In private, Queen Mother Olama, a woman whose counsel the chief sometimes pretended to ignore, stepped closer. She had watched for years how narratives were bent. She offered him a small room in the storeroom of the palace, where the gatherers could meet without being watched. "I have tended many fires," she said, "some that warmed the people, some that burned them. Do not mistake quiet for weakness. Use the quiet like a loom." There was a depth in her eyes that told Kachi that she had once been young and believed in simple systems. She had been in the oven, and now she had chosen a different thing, to calm the fire and teach the town to feel its own temperature. Kachi learned then that not all in the palace were united against him. He also learned that the war for minds moves in many small trades, kindness, stories, humble truth, and that time itself is an ally when you are right but patient. Still, the council's oven kept burning, and Obadiah would soon try an even cleverer move, turning affection into fear by using someone Kachi loved. The hand inside the town's machinery was not yet done testing how far it could push ordinary hearts. Relearning the map people have maps for their towns, the road to the river, the path to the palm grove, the lane where lovers meet. But Kachi learned the most dangerous map was the one drawn inside people's minds, the one that told them who to trust, what to fear, and which memories to keep. The gatherers met in the storeroom by the palace. Their faces, the first nights, carried the small excitement of children learning a new game. Amara set a pot of tea and passed cups like she always had, with the patient knowledge of someone who cooks not to fill stomachs, but to keep people talking. "We teach questions," Kachi said plainly, "and we teach how to ask without making the other person a traitor. Curiosity, not accusation. That will be our medicine." They practiced like actors at a night rehearsal. A barber would pretend to be a worried villager. A teacher would play someone repeating a rumor. The gatherers learned to say gently, "Who first told you this? What proof do we have? Who benefits if we all believe it?" The curfew of small questions began to loosen the hold of lies. Slowly, things changed. The barber's chair carried conversations that sounded, to him, like small revolutions. The cola seller started asking customers about the origin of a story, and discovered one of her regulars was being paid to whisper against Kachi in exchange for a small credit line. The palm wine tapper refused a coin and refused to repeat the line. The teacher put the question into an assignment, and children returned home, asking their parents if they had wondered where their feelings had come from. Not everyone came around. Some people preferred the comfort of supposed clarity. The work of doubting is laborious. Others were in debt to Obadiah and could not afford the suspicion. But communities are like fields, with patches of sun and shadow. Even if full harvest is not immediate, saplings begin to sprout. A twist came that no one predicted, and it was sharp enough to cut confidence like a new razor. Nena, childhood friend, fierce as any warrior, the woman who stood between Kachi and the first angry stones, was seen speaking privately to a trader who had often been near the chief. A photograph, a crude portrait taken by a man who liked to note things, was circulated, Nena in the trader's hut, hands on a bowl, laughing. The rumor blossomed into a story. Nena was conspiring. She had been taking money to persuade Kachi to stop, or worse, to bring him into compromising deals. Kachi felt the blow like a physical thing. Nena did not come to the storeroom that night. She was seen later in the market, but moved like someone forced to carry shame. He tracked her down to a veranda behind the soapmaker's house, where the air smelled of cassava and old soap lye. "Why?" he asked without preamble. "Did you betray me?" Nena looked up with eyes like flint. "They took my baby's father," she said simply. Kachi stared, waiting. "They said they would stop sending soldiers to his town if I visited traders and let them put certain words into my mouth. They said I would be repaid for my brother's debts. They said my child would be safe. What could I do? They threatened to take what little we have." There was a long silence. Kachi's first thought was righteous anger, the kind that leaps toward a head to be cut. But the gatherers had taught him another rhythm. Listen first, then act. "You should have told me," he said softly. "We would have found another way." Nena's shoulders shook. "I thought I could handle it. I never thought it would look like this." It was a lesson in grief for Kachi. People are rarely traitors for love of treachery. They are usually acting under duress, bargaining with the small available life they have. Obadiki's machine had currency not only in coins, but in debts and threats. It could coerce even the bravest into cooperation. Kachi did not lash out. He held her hands and felt the quick tremor of a woman pulled by fear. Then he did what he had learned to do. He asked questions that cut to the heart of the matter. Who told them they could take your baby's father? Who benefits? As they traced the threads, a picture emerged. A minor official in the chief's network, not the chief directly, but one of the people who answered to him, had indeed told Nena's oppressors they would keep an eye away from a certain border if certain things were done. The compression of local power had moved like a net. Kachi and the gatherers worked to unpick it carefully. Public shaming would have endangered Nena's family further. They needed another approach. They collected evidence. The mason remembered conversations where the official had boasted. The barber had overheard a tavern man confirm a coin exchange. A paper was found with a ledger entry that looked suspicious. All of this had to be handled delicately. In Umuoma, proof had always been something that could itself be manufactured. They did something brave. They confronted the official in public with a question in place of a condemnation. The gatherers staged it at the grain market where many eyes were naturally present, and where cloth and food changed hands like votes. The teacher read a simple statement. "We ask who benefits if we take away a person's safety to get their silence." It sounded like a lesson and not an accusation. People who were used to being told what to feel began to recall the taste of their own thought. The official, surprised by the bravery and the community's quiet assembly, faltered. A few honest men corroborated the ledger entries. The pressure was enough that the official had to retract her threats, and word reached the traders who had threatened Nena's baby's father. In the end, the small man who had been taken returned to his family. No parade, no trumpets, just the slow, satisfying sound of justice performed in the language of community rather than in the spectacle of punishment. It cost them something. The official retaliated privately, contributing to a later stunt that would hurt Kachi's reputation in a way that would ache for months. But the moral of that painful episode was clear. People are more resilient than machines often assume if someone teaches them gently the tools of seeing. The map was being redrawn, not by force, but by the patient placement of a different set of questions. Who benefits? Who suffers? Who speaks first? Kachi learned that the fight against crowd engineering is not only about exposing liars. It is about building networks so that those who are coerced have paths away from coercion. Power thrives where people are alone. The gatherers created safety in numbers and in questions. They learned how to protect those who had been bought or threatened, and how to make it costly for the council to use private lives as currency. But Obadiki was not done. He had one more large test planned, one that would force Kachi and the town to choose whether they wanted the labor of thinking or the comfort of being told what to feel. The next move would push the town so hard it would either break into awareness or snap back into old obedience. The quiet storm. Sometimes the loudest revolutions are quiet. A small, inexorable change in how people speak to one another, until suddenly the air itself feels different. By the time the rains came thin and clean, Umuoma had become a town of small fissures and stubborn hopes. The gatherers had created pockets of clarity, barbers who asked questions, teachers who assigned doubt, and markets where people paused. But Obadik, irritated and clever, chose a last, dangerous audition. He intended to show the town that questioning leads to chaos, not to liberty. He arranged a night meant to look like a tragedy. Through his network, he created a rumor that the town's granary, newly stocked with millet and yams after a bountiful season, had been embezzled by a ring of agitators. Leaflets appeared anonymously in doorways, accusing unnamed men of taking food and secretly selling it across the border. The accusation flicked like dry tinder. The town's stomachs memorized it quickly. People who had once paused now felt their old predictable fear. Lack will create anger. Anger seeks an outlet, and an outlet needs a scapegoat. The gatherers knew the pattern. They moved to ask questions quietly. Who left the leaflet? What proof exists? But fear moves faster than careful thought. An angry crowd formed in front of the granary, torches like tongues of flame, faces hard as unshucked kernels. On the granary threshold, a fragile scene began to unfold. A group of young men, some of them gatherers' apprentices, stood quietly and began to sing a slow song that Kachi had taught them years before. It was a song about remembering where your fear came from. Their voices were small and unamplified, but the song cut through the noise like cool wind. People paused. For a moment, the torches wavered. Then a man with a cracked voice shouted, "They are covering for thieves! Arrest them!" It could have been the end. A pile of men pushed forward, and things might have turned violent. Instead, Kachi stepped onto an empty crate and spoke. "I know hunger," he said. His voice was simple, almost tired. "But who told you that these men stole? Who left leaflets? Show me proof. If you have proof, bring it. If you do not, then do not let hunger make you cruel." The words were not fancy, they were workmanlike. And the work of thinking is sometimes the dullest work of all. Someone in the crowd, an old woman who had once lent Kachi a cup of palm oil, answered, "We have no proof." Still, the anger needed an enemy. A group of people, uncertain and scared, began to look at anyone who didn't shout. A young man stepped forward who had been with the gatherers and was now known to ask inconvenient questions. He was pushed and shoved. The crowd wanted a body to punish. In that tense moment, the Queen Mother Olama walked into the square. She had not always been on the side of the gatherers, but she carried the moral authority of a woman whose hands had seen births and deaths, and whose voice had once stopped a skirmish with a single proverb. She did something the council had not expected. She walked to the granary shelves, picked up a handful of millet, and let it run through her fingers to let the sound settle. Then she said, in the thick voice of one who remembers, "A home's grain is not for rumour. We will not make a festival of hunger by blaming the weak." Her intervention cooled the crowd enough for evidence-seeking to begin in earnest, rather than for violence to erupt. The police, a thin band of men who always took orders from the chief but were often swayed by public dignity, were asked to collect the leaflets. When they did, one of the bits of paper had a price scribbled on it, and on the seller's mark was a small symbol known to be printed at a particular press. A press that worked for a trader tied to the chief's network. It was small proof, but in a town where people were beginning to remember to ask, small proof mattered. The trader's morning delivery schedule had also been noticed by a taxi driver who took the gatherers to a neighboring village the day before. They brought the driver forward to corroborate. When presented publicly with both the leaflets and the witness, the trader's story frayed. He had been paid a small token to stir opinion and had not expected the fire. The panic dissipated like mist. The crowd that had been ready to burn a man instead walked home with hearts much heavier, but minds sharper. After that night, the veneer over Obadaiki's machine began to crack more visibly. People had seen that fear could be engineered, and, crucially, that asking where it came from could save lives and dignity. The gatherers did not win everything. The chief remained powerful, and he still pulled old levers. He would survive in one form or another. But Kachi realized that power's long game is not invulnerable. A town that learns to ask will always make it costly for someone to wire them. In the quiet after the storm, Kachi and Amara sat beneath the palm trees and listened to the town breathe. There were losses, friends who had chosen profit over principle, small shops that had closed because their owners feared being seen on the wrong side, a teacher who was moved to a different town as punishment for his questions. There were also gains. A woman's son who could now go to school without the same fear, a market seller who refused to be paid to spread rumors, and a baby who was no longer at risk because the town had asked questions about the threats. Kachi thought about a final lesson to give a people who had nearly been wired into submission. The idea of ownership of the mind is not a gift you discover. It is a craft you build. You are not born with a mind that never learns from others, he told the gatherers. You are born capable of choosing what to feed it. The work is to learn the tools of that choice. He taught them one last ritual. Before you pass along a rumor, ask 3 things. Who told you? Who benefits? And can anyone show proof? He taught them to make those questions as common as passing salt. It was not a perfect cure. People still believed in easy answers sometimes. But now, the town had practiced resistance. That practice mattered more than an argument won. It was the small habit of thinking that, in the long run, changes who a community becomes. And as the sun rose over Umuoma the next morning, there was a sound like ordinary life. Children running, women laughing, vendors calling. But threaded through it all was a new rhythm. People pausing and asking, pausing and naming. pausing and remembering that their minds belonged not to the hidden hands, but to themselves. Kachi walked through the market and overheard a child ask, "Mama, who told you that story?" The woman smiled and replied, "I don't remember. Let us see." The child's small face creased with curiosity rather than obedient acceptance. That face, Kachi thought, was the future of a people who had learned a small but enormous thing, to question the feed, and thus to be free. The oven that cooked plots remained warm in the palace. People still bought into old comforts, but the town had learned the language of suspicion not as a weapon, but as a skill. A skill to be used lovingly, to protect dignity and demand evidence. It was, in many ways, the beginning of a new kind of power, one held in common rather than hoarded by a few. Kachi did not become a ruler. He did not want to. He understood something deeper by the time the rains washed the market clean. True leadership is teaching others to be leaders of themselves. And when a town builds enough of those leaders, the smallest hands can loosen even the oldest ropes. He walked on, not hearing the drums of victory, but feeling the soft, steady drum of a town, remembering how to be its own mind.